What happens when a high-level NBA prospect goes wrong? That is what we are taking a look at today with the case of Kevin Porter Jr., a player with all the potential in the world, but consistently got in the way of himself. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. To start off, we've got to begin with the NBA draft, where Kevin Porter Jr. was selected 30th overall by the Milwaukee Bucks and then later traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers. As a prospect, Kevin Porter Jr. showed gobs of potential. As a two-guard, he was a strong ISO player with a good body for a wing. NBA-level athleticism, very quick, has the potential to be a good shooter. And the biggest knocks on him were his tendency at times to get out of play, or out of control on a play. 1.4 assists and 1.9 turnovers per game. That he doesn't always make the right play in his overall decision making. And that is something that we would not only see on the court for Kevin Porter Jr. later on, but off of it as well. In Cleveland for his rookie season, Kevin Porter Jr. would play 50 games, average 10 points. But the biggest storylines from the season were not his on-the-court play. And there were certainly flashes of potential there, but the main focus was on outside of the court, in which Kevin Porter Jr. had a heated exchange with a Cleveland Cavaliers coach over his locker being given to new-coming veteran Taurean Prince. Reportedly, KPJ would snap at the coach, and coach snapped back. And with Kobe not being able to calm him, that was truly the last straw for KPJ, most likely. And for the time being, Porter would not be allowed back in the Cleveland Cavaliers facility. And ultimately, he would go over to Houston, where he would spend the next 4 years of his career. And this is where the flaws of Porter as a player would really come to fruition. There were some off-the-court controversies as well, but mainly up until the end, his tenure in Houston was mainly focused on his lack of playing ability and being too turnover prone, and that decision-making really coming back to bite him. During one game, however, he did get into an argument with assistant coach John Lucas and would leave the stadium during halftime in the middle of a Houston Rockets game. Now, the biggest issue with this wasn't just that he left, but it was the way that Kevin Porter Jr. was utilized on this team. Because as a prospect, his best potential was as a combo guard and a wing. But the Houston Rockets, they tried to utilize Kevin Porter Jr. at the point guard. And counting stats-wise, he was fine. His efficiency could have been quite a bit better, and he could have limited his turnovers a lot more. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But at the end of the day, overall, the point guard is supposed to be your true team leader. This is a guy that's going to facilitate for others. So many of them have great minds for the game, and they might go on to be coaches someday. But for Kevin Porter Jr., he was just not the personality to be a proper leader for the Houston Rockets team. But he was given the role of that point guard, and he was not up to the task. And doing something like this, going out and leaving in the middle of a game, sets a horrible precedent for the rest of the team. And that is not a positive culture that is being instilled from your point guard, the guy that others are supposed to look to, both on the court and off of it. And having these moments of lashing out, no matter what he does on the court, as your leader, this is behavior that in a league like the NBA is not going to be tolerated, because they can find other talented point guards, especially in the modern NBA. There are so many. Even fringe starters now are very talented, especially at that point guard position. They're not going to keep you just for talent and some mediocre production. They're going to keep you for the intangibles, what you bring to the team, what you bring to the locker room, what you create, the culture that you instill. And that is where Kevin Porter Jr. as a point guard failed. But the on-the-court play wasn't too pretty either. And this is not all on him. Up until Ime Udoka got there, and KPJ never got to play with Udoka for reasons that we will get into, the Houston Rockets kind of ran their offense more similar to an AAU team than an NBA basketball team. It was plenty of ISO ball and trusting Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green to go out there and beat the other team. And that can work if you've got two studs in your backcourt. If you have Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, you're going to trust those guys to go out there and beat your team. Klay's not the best example. He's more of a catch-and-shoot guy. Let's just say, Kyrie Irving and James Harden, or Luka and Kyrie right now. You can trust those guys to go out there and essentially be the offense, not play within a scheme necessarily, but truly be the scheme and be what the rest of the team can build their offense around and cater to in terms of having a supporting role. But KPJ and Jalen Green, they both struggled with efficiency. And even now, Jalen Green has still not reached the heights that he has the potential to. But with KPJ especially, because this is a guy that's the primary ball handler, the guy that's the point guard of this team. As a point guard, he is a score-first point guard because he is more of a combo guy, more of a wing. So as a result, he's going to look for his own shots, and he would pass up some very good opportunities and go on to take a bad shot, and it would ultimately miss quite a bit of the time. His efficiency was quite below league average, even for a point guard, over his years in Houston. Up until maybe that last year where he was about 44% from the field. In 2022, it was 42.5% from the field and 31% from three. My bad, that was 2020. In the 2021 season, it went down even more to 41.5% from the field. Although on the bright side, his three-point percentage did go up to 37.5%, which is actually pretty good. And then his last season with the Rockets, he would shoot 44.2% from the field. So, in general, aside from maybe that last year and taking some strides from the three-point line, he was, in general, a pretty inefficient point guard. And when you're a score-first guard, that's really the last thing that you can be. Because if you're a facilitator and you're inefficient at scoring the ball, you can make up for it for the other things that you do. But this is a guy that also had a very high turnover rate. And his assist-to-turnover ratios were some of the worst in the league. He was consistently near the top of the NBA in terms of turnovers per game. And this goes back to his decision-making, not always making the right play. He's so often going to look for his own shot. And overall, the point guard experiment on the court and off of it for Houston did not work out for Kevin Porter Jr. Whether it was being not the best leader, not a role model for this team, when at your position, that is what you were supposed to be. Guys are supposed to look towards you, especially for this Houston Rockets team that didn't have many veterans. Kevin Porter Jr. was one of the main vets, if you can even call him that, for this team. So aside from his position, this is still someone that guys are going to look to for guidance just because he is one of the more experienced players on the entire team. And he couldn't do that. And in terms of his on-the-court play, it was average at best, at the very, very best. Aside from one 50-point outing, 10 assist night, that was great. It really showed the flashes Kevin Porter Jr. had, but it makes it all the more disappointing that he was never able to reach those heights once again. But to focus on that point guard experiment and how it failed, one thing worth noting, however, is that Porter Jr. wasn't designed, he doesn't play the game like a point guard, and perhaps he should not have been put in that position in the first place. Ultimately, this is a guy who is more of a wing, more of a score-first guy, not necessarily a creator for others. He can create his own shot decently well, and that's really why they went to him at the point guard position. But when you're having so many turnovers and you can't facilitate for others, and you don't have the personality and just intangibles that other guys can look to, you really shouldn't be the point guard. So part of that failure is not on him. It's the way that Houston really didn't scheme their offense. They just kind of let KPJ play some ISO ball and trusted him to be the point when that was never really the role that he was supposed to have. And it's a poor utilization of a high potential NBA player. Because ultimately you're going to be at your best when you're playing the position that comes naturally to you, that your skills cater best to, and that was not point guard. So part of it does fall down to the team and the Houston Rockets' failure to play to Kevin Porter Jr.'s strengths. But at the end of the day, if they are going to give you that opportunity at the point guard, if they are going to trust in you to be their point guard, you have to make the most of it in whatever way you can. And you can argue that he might have tried on the court, but off the court, he set a bad precedent, and a negative culture in that locker room that is unacceptable for a player at the point guard position. one who was supposed to lead the team. And then ultimately, the last real straw that broke the camel's back for Kevin Porter Jr. in Houston was an incident in a Newark hotel in which Porter would ultimately plead guilty to a misdemeanor assault and harassment charges. And that's obviously a very serious topic. And it was really one that put his entire career in jeopardy because despite the on-the-court play that was mediocre at best, despite his lack of leadership, at the end of the day, he had potential, and teams are going to bank on that very frequently. But to have a moment like this, the bad publicity from it, and overall just another reminder of the way that you are not set up to be a leader. And, this is an incident that people aren't really going to gravitate to you afterwards. And rightfully so. It looked like the real end of KPJ's NBA career. He would go on to Greece and play over there, and ultimately he's made his way back into the NBA now with the Los Angeles Clippers. And this is a very serious case, and I hope the victim is able to carve out the best possible future for her. And the actions of Kevin Porter Jr. were really unacceptable, and it looked like he was going to be on the outside of the league looking in, and rightfully so. But ultimately, the Los Angeles Clippers, they would bet on his potential, and KPJ has had his worst year yet. The counting stats are serviceable enough, especially for a bench player, even if they are the lowest of his career at about 9 points per game, 3 boards, 2 assists. One thing worth noting, though, however, is the 3-point percentage is at 18%, and that's really bad. And that's what's really marred this stint in LA for Porter Jr., aside from the off-the-court drama. On the court, it hasn't been good either. And for the role that he has on this team, we've learned that he can't play within a role well either. He can't be the main guy, as we saw in Houston, but he can't play within a role either. Because in terms of, the minutes that he has played, relative to all that, because arguably, he's better than a guy that never gets minutes. Relative to his minutes played, he's arguably been the worst player in the NBA this season for his shot making, his decision making, not making the right plays. Once again. And that's something that has marred Kevin Porter Jr. both on and off the court. His decision making. He never got it together. He never became the leader that the Houston Rockets could have used when he was their point guard. He hasn't done it in LA now. A team that really gave him a chance when it looked like he wasn't going to get another one. And they gave him a chance, and he hasn't done well with it. So you've got off-the-court drama now so frequently, so many lashing outs. Now you've got charges against him, bad publicity, and he can't be a leader on your team. He can't be a go-to guy in your offense, and he can't play a role either. So there's really not a good spot for Kevin Porter Jr. right now, and this is a player who had such high potential, but really due to his own doing for the most part, it all went downhill, and this is a player that I was high on at one point. But at this point, he has largely become indefendable. He has not improved himself. Been one of the, relative to minutes once again, worst players in the entire NBA this season. So he can't play within the role. He can't be a leader. And when you can't do either of those things, it's hard to carve out a spot in the NBA. If you can't be a top option, you can find a good spot as a role player. And if you can't play within a role, you have to be just good enough to where a team can trust in you to be the guy. And KPJ is neither of those. And there's so many off-the-court issues with him as well, that someone with such high potential as him, who even got a last chance shot when it looked like he wasn't going to, he has still gone and made it not work out, and he is really the worst case of a high potential player. And really his career, the way it's turned out, has been the worst possible scenario for Kevin Porter Jr. because there are no redeeming qualities at this point to it. There are not still question marks to be had. Like, say if he had just always been a role player and he did okay at that, or maybe he didn't even do okay at that, but teams had never experimented him with being the first option, so they say, hey, well, if this guy has all the talent, let's make him a go-to point, a focal point of our offense. Well, we saw that in Houston, and it didn't work out either. So there's been no stone unturned for Kevin Porter Jr., and every stone unturned has made it clear that his talent, as great as it is, has not translated to the NBA due to personality, negative culture, and lack of proper play on the court. For such a high potential NBA player, Kevin Porter Jr. has perhaps hit the worst case scenario for his NBA career. And it's a shame to see as someone who had so much talent, but ultimately it was really self-inflicted. And that is all for today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Nash Roberts.